We come to the 12th presentation in this year-long series. There's the generic title, Parayana, the way beyond, the way above, paradise, paranormal. But it, in Sanskrit, as in the Buddhist time, it was the way across. It's the way across a cessation. In Sanskrit, the Hindu term from the Vedas, like the Rig Veda and its derivatives, the Sami Veda and so forth, the word moksha means extinction. It means that a yogic power has come to the end of the magical powers, and beyond that there is the consciousness that it is moksha. It's extinguished. The ability, the need, the control of power and powers in the universe has reached its limit, and you've gone beyond. And the classic Buddha, doing a transform of the Hindu means the religion of Hind, the ancient word for India in terms of its people, whereas the ancient term for India was Bharata in terms of the history of India, of the people. But the classic Buddha changed. Instead of moksha, it was nirvana. And to have reached nirvana, he said, everything that has been lifted up has been lifted up. Everything that needed to be taken down has been taken down. Nirvana. The deeper quality of that was a series of 16 sutras that were woven together. Sutra means thread. And when you have a pattern of threads, you have a fabric. And the fabric of those 16 was called Parayana, the way beyond. It's the way beyond nirvana. It is the way beyond, the way across moksha. So that the nothingness that is outside of the actionable universe is able to be entered. The way beyond, the Parayana, goes to further dimensions that the universe has not yet expanded to, that the universe is not phenomenal in. And in those further dimensions, what occurs in the Parayana. This particular year is an exploration of how the impress of that not only went forward from the classic time of the Buddha, but went in a symmetry back in time from the classic time of the Buddha, so that the Parayana from about 500 BC began to have a parenthetical, echoing wave form all the way through civilization. And because it came in such a energetic wave form, large-scale wave forms, it became apparent about 500 years later that those waveforms were energy waves. They were the energy waves of civilization. We today in physics would call them density waves. And those waves made the sense that phenomenal reality is an energy that is able to become matter, is able to become phenomenon, and exist in space and also exist in time, and that there's a fabric, space-time, in which they exist, in which they have phenomenality, but that their origin is the emergence out of a primordialness that was not yet formed, not yet into phenomenon. In Eskimo, Inuit mythology, they say that in the beginning the world was slush. It wasn't yet ice. It wasn't water. It was just slush. It was a chaos. It was a mixture. The quality of emergence out of this slush, we would today call it a primordial plasma, has just been talked about on the web and many, many sites of the discovery by astronomers, astrophysicists at the Harvard-Smithsonian Institution, that there were gravity waves confirmed by experiment at the very beginning of what is called the Big Bang. It is a major breakthrough in astrophysics, the first direct detection of primordial gravitational waves, which are the first shock after the Big Bang, which marked the birth of the universe. One of the most important discoveries of all time just happened. Gravity waves are those density waves. Those density waves, gravity waves, have a tone, and their tone is that they integrate, they bring together. They bring together in such a way that there are increasing variations of how they come together. And so there is a quality where the universe, before there are particles, before there are atoms, before there are subatomic particles, there is this slush, this plasma, that instantly that it appears in time, the space that blossoms with it, out of it, shows that there are already gravity waves, already density waves that are coursing before there is matter, before there is particles. There are particles. And so the quality of understanding this, though it seems somewhat mysterious to 21st century physics in terms of very high dharma, it's understandable in the following way, that what triggers the emergence is time, and that time is an energy. It is an energy that comes out of a field that is pre-primordial, that one can only call nature. And we do. And we give it a gender. We call her Mother Nature. And as time comes forth spontaneously, because there was no time before, there was only the field, a kind of a zero field, not a 0 point, but a zero field. 0 points vanish. They absorb. They don't occur. They're fictional. But a zero field is capable of being real before it is existential, before it is phenomenal. So that the existentiality of time emerging blossoms into the phenomenality of space instantly, because now time, as an energy, the high Dharma way was to say time is now coursing, and as it courses, it emanates space, the 3 dimensions of space. So that while space-time looks like a seamless fabric, it has stages. it has a primordiality. It has an emergence into time and thus existential, and then instantly it has the ability to resonate as space, so that if you count, there's 1, 2, 3. And so the triad, the trinity, if you will, the tris magic, the thrice greatest magic, the trismegistus, is to be able to understand that phenomenality and existentiality and reality are 3 different stages, as it were, and that wisdom can have a retrospective where one understands phenomenality first, and then one understands the refinement of existence, and finally one comes to the nirvana moksha, the extinction nirvana, and one can go across that because one has a thrice greatest wisdom. And so the emergence of a Hermes, a guide of the spirits, of the souls. One has a guide who is able to take one to all 3 levels. And the going to the 3 levels from the world begins with phenomenality, refines itself through fermentation to an existentiality, and then distills that into the 3rd greatest, and that is the ability to come across to the Parayana, to the high Dharma. The world is capable of truths, phenomenal truths. The existentiality that ferments and refines out of that is able to come to a very refined truth. But the distillation of that is able to come to the high Dharma of reality. And so we are looking at this during this year, all the presentations, each Saturday morning. It is a quality of being able to attend to a continuity that is able to go through the phenomenality of the world to the existentiality of the universe to the reality of the cosmos. Because contemporary with the historical Buddha was Pythagoras. And it's Pythagoras who gave the Greek term cosmos to reality, that it is not only what the phenomena are, it's not only what the existentiality behind the phenomena are, it is the reality within which an existentiality behind a phenomenality can, in its vibratory dancing of energy, make the world. In the dance, it is a Maya. In the ability to choreograph the dance, it is a Dharma, but the ability to go with accumulated energy waves, density waves, back to before the primordiality to go into the reality. This is a high Dharma. We're looking at the developments by which this occurrence of what I have just delivered was brought into a perfection about 90 AD, 90s AD in Alexandria, between 90 and say 100 AD, in that decade. And out of that came not just a confluence, not just an integral, but in its complementarity, a differential, the differential consciousness, the dimensions of differential consciousness that become apparent in existentiality behind the phenomenality, but progressively then refine the accumulated penetration not only into the future, but into not just the past, but reshaping, transforming the past so that the future and the new past become able to be real as a continuum. And it is that continuum that is the zero infinite fields, the zero field of nature, the infinite field of consciousness, coming into a tunable pair. And is that is the high Dharma composition. That's the scalar that one can work on. And by the last decade of the 1st century AD, this was expressed in the classic Hermetica, which were almost immediately sabotaged. They were sabotaged by those that did not contest it so much, but effectively by those that tried to ignore it. And they predated those ignoring it, those making no issue with it whatsoever, predated 90 AD. And those then that sought to commandeer it and lead it off into different directions were after 100 AD. And so one finds an interesting, again, kind of parenthesis of ignorance and of hijacking. And so it takes a long time to be able to settle into the fermentation and to master the way in which water becomes wine. But to be able to distill the wine into the cognac takes an even longer time, and it is only in recent times that there was a penetration capable of being able to go to the cognac, to the liqueur, as in alchemy one calls it, the spirits. One now not only has the water into wine, one has the wine into spirits. And actually the first spirit ever made was chartreuse in France. Green chartreuse was made about 1,000 years ago, and it was potent. It's still for sale for very much money on very rare sites in the world. And there's a yellow chartreuse, which is somewhat less, but the green chartreuse, if you try a little shot, you will have trouble swallowing it. Is devastatingly potent. The thrice greatest spirit can be devastatingly penetrable because it does not shred the world, but it makes the world that had become transparent through wisdom invisible. Whereas the spirit was invisible before, and the existentiality was transparently there, nevertheless, and the world was phenomenal. When one goes to the high Dharma spirit, it is the phenomenality of the world that becomes invisible. Because in the real, one has a scalar that exceeds the universe. And so a high Dharma teaching is careful to give an introduction to it that has the laving quality of the waves, but the waves that only become effective sets after a while and after acquaintance, so that one begins to build the strength to be real. And in Sanskrit, the strength to be real is called virya, out of which in Indo-European language we get the word virile in English. Virya is the strength, sometimes called fortitude. If you look at the classic major arcana of the tarot deck, strength is the 8th of the major arcana, and strength is always feminine. And it is the lion that would rule, be the king of beasts of the world. The jaws of the lion are held open by the woman, by the feminine. And her ability not only to hold the lion of the world from being able to bite, to feed, but in the high Dharma, the initial confrontation of that, she is able to endure the roar of the lion. With the caveat that men who are powerful in the world cannot endure the lion's roar. Whereas women, the feminine, while they hear the lion's roar, they feel the power of the lion's roar. They're able to persevere and not be daunted by the lion's roar, and to have then the fortitude, to have the strength to keep the lion of the world from biting and from consuming, and especially for consuming the children, the young, the babies, the unprotected, the growing, the stages of coming into life to where one is able to blossom not only existentiality into life, but to distill out of life love. And so love is a spirit, is a distilled spirit. And it is women, it is the feminine that carries this reality all the way through all of the levels, from here to the universe, to the cosmos, and beyond. So that when one comes to a very interesting focus that we've had for the last month, maybe 5 weeks, 6 weeks, in Apuleius's The Golden Ass, because the protagonist is a man that becomes an ass. He becomes a donkey, a beast. And one of the stories that he hears is about Amor and Psyche. This is a study of Amor and Psyche, the psychic development of the feminine, a commentary on The Tale by Apuleius. This is by Erich Neumann. Erich Neumann was a Jungian analyst from Tel Aviv and one of the world's great psychiatrists, famous for his book, A History of Consciousness, done about 50, 60 years ago in the Bollingen series. Amor and Psyche also is there in the Bollingen series. It is Amor and Psyche that is one of the major stories in the books, the 11 books of the Golden Ass. The Greek title of it is Metamorphoses, the transformations. The Metamorphoses has this development of the discovery of love by the feminine. And it's near the close of book 4, and it goes through book 5 and into the beginning of book 6. So it's like a fulcrum in those 11 books. It is the basis by which, if you learn the ancient dynamics of being able to penetrate something, the classic thing was always the spear thrower, the javelin thrower. And in order to really heft a javelin, one grabs it 1/3 of the way from the edge and 2/3 of it forward, and one can do a thrust that then penetrates. The spear, in order to kill the animal, has to go through the hide. You have to really throw it. The tale of Cupid and Psyche is that balance point in the Metamorphoses by which one can grab, one can put a hand on, one can come into the feel of how that dynamic needs to be balanced in order to throw, in order to penetrate through the resistances. The point of that javelin, of that throw, is the 11th book of the Metamorphoses, and the 11th book is called the Isis book. It is about the mature, feminine love that comes into being able to reach through the ultimate beast of confrontation for all life through its existential base into the reality out of which all of that must eventually have originated and still mysteriously be there in like a very large way. The universe that one can see is only 4%. 96% you can't see. It's dark matter, dark energy, which are both from ineffable reality, which is not seeable at all, nevertheless is real. She is able to reach from the real in that feminine way and bring life back out of death, to be the way in which the hand, the pivot, is able to throw the javelin of rebirth so that one can live again. And so it is the ability for psyche, the Greek word psyche actually originally meant butterfly, and became then the psyche, which is a butterfly which comes out of the cocoon made by the caterpillar of normal phenomenality into the transform of the butterfly, the psyche. The transform to psyche is already a fermentation through that cocoon, through that womb. But it is the ability to distill life into a very high Dharma wisdom that brings rebirth into, from the real into reality. Into reality in the universe, into reality in the world, any world. Anywhere that life is, one can bring it back. There is not only a rebirth of human beings, there is a rebirthing of any form of life in the universe whatsoever, through the powers of the real. Isis, in the current studies of Isis, just to bring 2 books out, one here by Tom Cavelli, published by Quest Books, Embodying Osiris, the Science of Alchemical Transformation. Because the first person that Isis brings back into rebirth is her dead husband Osiris. He is not only dead, he is dismembered. He is dismembered into 14 parts by his antagonist, Set. The image of Set in ancient Egypt was that of a desert red dog, a mad desert red dog. That kind of God now has disdain for life, especially human life that has all of these pretensions, all of these capabilities, and before they get these capabilities, they must be torn apart, dismembered. And Osiris is dismembered into 14 parts and scattered throughout that center of the known world. And Isis goes around patiently in her fortitude. She collects all of the fragments, all of the members of Osiris, and puts them back together into a living Osiris. And so another great book is called Remembering Osiris. Number, gender, and the word in ancient Egyptian representational systems. They're not representational, they're presentational. The existential quality is that they're presented. The representation is an image which is a part of the phenomenal world. But the existential is presentational. But the high dharma is that it is real. That it is. The 11th book of Apuleius begins with the man who has been turned into an ass, into a beast, comes face to face with Isis, and her differential conscious reality is able to bring the man back into resurrection out of the beast. And in doing so, the beast become a man again, is able to recognize that Queen of Heaven, whether you are Ceres, nurturing mother, and Ceretrix of crops, who in your joy at finding your daughter again set aside the ancient acorn, fodder for wild beasts, and taught man the use of civilized food, and now fructify the plowlands of Eleusis, or whether you are Venus, Urania, who in the first beginning of the world, by giving birth to love, brought together the opposite sexes, and so with never-ending regeneration perpetuated the human race, and now are worshipped. And he goes on saying that Isis has so many facets that she is the way in which all of those facets make a jewel. And it is only by cutting the jewel out of the thread of material that goes all the way through the different levels of cosmos, universe, world, us, able to penetrate all the way to the real and bring it through. It is this quality of rebirthing that is the penultimate treatise out of the 14 classic Hermetica. The first is the Poimandres, the mind shepherd, the creative mind shepherd, watching over the flock of high wisdom. And the 13th is the rebirth. The 14th was the high Dharma perfect sermon. The first is sometimes called the general sermon. The second was the Sermon on the Mountain, the Sermon on the Mount. And the third is the perfect sermon. And that Asclepius was lost because of very devious, powerful reasons. In antiquity, in the early 200s AD, which we will talk about more next week in depth, of how it was lost, that lost Hermetica was the Asclepius, the perfect sermon, that was translated into Latin by Apuleius, not a part of the Golden Ass, but a separate saving of that dialogue in Latin, which is the only way that we have evidence, because the Greek original was effaced permanently, so those powers thought, those persons thought, no one will ever find it again because it won't be even in existence. But the high Dharma knows how to go beyond existence, not only beyond the world, but beyond existence, and reach the real. Let's take a break. Let's come back to not our focus so much, that, but beyond the focus are the resonances. And behind the resonances, in order to be heard as resonances, is a harmonic. And that harmonic is able to occur because of silence. Without the punctuation, there is no way to tell sound from chaos. And without the distilling of sound into the word, there's no way to tell what the sound is saying. And so, at the focus of what became energy time forms, that teacher was called the Word. For all those reasons. And it was real, is real. There's no past in real. There's no future. It's eternal. As time spontaneously emerges eternally, space instantly blossoms, and in its blossoming unfurls the gravity waves, which in terms of phenomenality are at the beginning. They're very near the beginning. It must be the beginning. The beginning of time making space. So that space, spatiality, has a gravitas of gravity waves from the get-go. So that the way in which the Harvard-Smithsonian discovery of just a few days ago, of the ability to refine our techne, which is the Greek word for art. Our techne, the study of techne is technology, techneology, so that we can discern those gravity waves, those density waves of energy that begin to pulse in their resonances that have a very interesting, eventually, now and forever, harmonic. There is such a thing in mathematics, a whole section of harmonic analysis. It's gone very far afield into the depth and capabilities by the 21st century. Lots. The quality is mysterious enough that one of the great astronomy magazines published in Wisconsin, of all places, Finding the Missing Universe, an issue that came out just before the confirmation and discovery. So we are living in 2014, which is a time, a date, a calendar that's within a time form. The 2014 is exactly 2,000 years from 14. What happened in 14 AD? In 14 AD, the first emperor of the world died, Augustus Caesar. And just as the emperor of the power of the world died, the coming up word teacher became the head, the president of the healers community, the therapeutai, just to the west of Alexandria, and became the head of that in 14 AD, and delivered an inaugurating, not a lecture, but a presentation, which was witnessed by a number of distinguished people. Among them was the greatest philosophical writer of the age, Philo of Alexandria, and he recorded that presentation in a little treatise called in Latin, De Vita Contemplativa, on the contemplative life, and you can find it, the Loeb Classical Library, published by Harvard, has it in one of the 14 volumes of Philo, Greek and English and facing pages. And Philo, says of Jesus' teaching at age 23, just outside of Alexandria, that when he began to speak, there was a silence within a silence in the room, in the hall. So that silence was the silence of the world into its existentiality, and the silence within the silence was the silence of the existentiality into the cosmos of its reality. And men and women alike sharing in complementarity, in symmetry, were able to hear. And those who were able to hear had ears to hear. They come in pairs. We're looking at, in 2014, the way in which time calibration as calendars is not just a calendar of seasons, but is a calendar of dimensions. And that the distillation of dimensions does not come immediately from the seasons. There's an interface. There's an existential interface between the phenomenality of seasons and the high dharma of dimensions. And that interface, classically, now for a long time, has been called phases. So when you look at the Shared Presence Foundation website about the learning civilization, it has seasons made into phases, and then phases distilled into dimensions. A pair of years, not two, but a pair, that are able to give you a natural cycle and a conscious ecology together, so that one is able to finally hear for oneself and to learn. If you depend upon a teacher, it's only an education. But if you participate in it, it's a learning. And civilization is only existential when there is learning. And the learning is only high wisdom when it's real. That's how it is. Worlds without end. In addition to Cupid and Psyche, the 11th book is about Isis in Apuleius' Metamorphoses. And one of the studies we mentioned was Amor and Psyche, the psychic development of the feminine by Erich Neumann. And another was Marie-Louise von Franz, The Golden Ass of Apuleius, and the liberation of the feminine in man. That in the species, man, it is paired, not two, but paired. It's not like there's a 1-2. There's a pair. It is tunable by pairs. It is tunable from the sound of pairs into the melody of a pair, pairedness. And that's where man comes first into focus, is there in that existentiality, within a real that has the pairedness raised through life into love, which is cosmic, is a spirit. The way that one is stopped from this in Apuleius is that the protagonist, the man, becomes a beast. He is a beast to the beautiful of the feminine. And so it becomes something that is of an enormously important, significant way in which this can be expressed. One of the very best expressions is a great film that Jean Cocteau made of The Beauty and the Beast. Philip Glass, one of the great opera composers of all time, still alive, has an opera on The Beauty and the Beast. It is a theme of fairy tales. When one tells stories, you're in the phenomenality of the world. When one tells myths, you're in the existential shaping behind the world. But when one deals with fairy tales, you're into the cosmic spirit, where the real, that was invisible, can now be seen through the transparency. And when you go through the looking glass, like Alice in Wonderland was able to do, you look back and you don't see the world, because now the mirror is opaqued. The world itself becomes the opaque backing of what was a transparency and now is blocked and becomes a mirror. So that one faces the problem of the mirror on both sides, on the worldly side and on the spiritual side. To the spiritual side, the psychic becomes like a mirror instead of a transparency. The only cure for that is to change the speed of time into reality, where there's no speed. It's spontaneous. If you're still dealing with speed, no matter how fast, you're going to mirror one way or the other. You can learn it suddenly. You can learn it over as long as you think protons are going to last. but learn we must. The theme of the Beauty and the Beast is classically also presented in Shakespeare's figure of Caliban in The Tempest. Shakespeare's last great play is The Tempest. And the beast in The Tempest is Caliban, and the beauty is the daughter of Prospero, who's the magician of the Tempest on this island, like an island in the Bahamas, where they have been shipwrecked, and in this lost, saying they come across the mother of Caliban, who is a fearful demonic spirit. There are demonic spirits, yes, who seek to mirror their limitations. And thus it's as regressive as if you were a materialist exclusively in the world. That's the truck that carries that away. As someone once said in San Francisco in the 60s, it amounts to a lot of garbage, one way or the other. The Beauty and the Beast has an ultimate quality when the beast becomes a figure of death. And one of the great telling fairy tales, because now it's not the myth of the beast and the beauty, it's the fairy tale of, like, Black Orpheus, Orfeu Negro in Portuguese. These are two different covers, and you can see the one is about the world, the other is about the mythic, but the film itself is the fairy tale that presents the distillation, that there is a quality where the feminine is a key to the rebirth out of death, and Isis is that figure classically, especially 2,000 years ago, and especially because of 3,000 years before that, 5,000 years ago. And here's a little monograph. There are academic things that almost nobody reads because they don't know. Sometimes someone does know and reads. This is Attic grave reliefs that represent women in the dress of Isis, published by the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, published by Princeton, 1988. It isn't just Egyptians that worship the myth of Isis. It became a part of the Greek language word world. At the cusp of time forms, which conveniently can be called 0 BC, or just as conveniently be called 1 AD. It is a quality of timelessness which makes it real and not just existential, and certainly not phenomenal. One has to go to a thrice greatest scalar in order to begin to appreciate. Otherwise, one doesn't know what one is hearing. Someone just coming in now via the web or the door or whatever will not hear what is going on, will not understand the significance, but especially invisible to them for a long while is the reality. It takes incredible patience, the patience of Job, the fortitude of Job's wife to see that one has to see through and go through and be not there, but be anywhere, anywhen. Last week we had handouts, as we have every week, and we have the title page of The Virgin of the World, which is a Hermetic treatise on Isis, which has been an esoteric quality of the Hermetica and was not included even in the classic Hermetica because it was a part of the real and not a part of the wisdom. It was high Dharma. And the Virgin of the World has a very interesting frontispiece, and it is Hermes Trismegistus wrapped in this kind of ultimate feminine mythic figure. And this figure, at the beginning of the Virgin of the World, because this translation, the first time in English of the Virgin in the World, by Anna Kingsford, and we will talk about her next week in depth, was able to see something that is existentially there, that the Virgin of the World was this statue, this mythic figure, and is a mythic figure, of Artemis. And one can see that in the next plate, here's Artemis. The same way. The many breasts are the mythos of the mother to all. And all of the other elements have the significance. Artemis had her own city. Her city was Ephesus, in what then was the Roman province of Asia. It's now a part of Turkey. Ephesus was a huge city at the time. It was about the fourth largest city in the world at the time. And that figure, the face of Artemis, has the mystery of her gaze, is not in the mythic, but is in the real. She's seeing through, not only through the world, but through the mythos into the real. Because it was there that the figure of Artemis, who is the feminine sister of Apollo, that she was the huntress. And she is the huntress of the ways in which one can help women survive childbirth, of the ways in which women can survive the travail of the world to be able to preserve love and life, and that one of her iconic mythic accoutrements was a hound, a hunting hound. And this particular hound is the last bit of a fragment found, with the statue of Artemis being completely smashed into bits, like Osiris. And this fragment was found in the far west country of England. And it was smashed in the 300s AD. And the accompanying edifice, temple, was completely dismembered at that time. And so all that was left were ruins. And after some 1700 years, it was finally investigated. And before we go to too many more presentations, we'll take a look at this site, which is not very far from the Bath in England, which was the scene of Jane Austen's novels and many other things. There are mysteries But the reality behind the myth of Artemis, behind the Isis phenomenality of Greek women wearing Isis dresses at funerals to ensure that the love is remembered, that the life is rememberable, and that reality remembers. It's important for us because there was a woman who lived in Ephesus near the energizing of the turn of the time form. She lived there from 36 AD to 57 AD. She didn't die, the phrase at the time, hermetically true and real. She went to sleep. And she was not buried in a tomb, but she was placed in a holding sarcophagus in the cave of the seven sleepers. It's one of the few sites holy because it is mentioned not only in Christian literature, but it's in the Quran as well. The cave of the seven sleepers is all about rebirth. It is this rebirthing that is a quality that the Virgin of the world is able to bring into play. One of the most important ways, almost like a rule of thumb, one holds up a thumb to get a perspective. One holds the thumb as that perspective's way of being able to grasp and do the manipulable detailing, to hold the pen, to make sure that one is able to express, and it is that rule of thumb that is important. Apuleius based his metamorphoses on a metamorphosis that came about a century and a half before he wrote that, and that is the Metamorphoses of Ovid. This was written and finally published in the scrolls of the time, 8 AD, by Ovid in the Roman Empire. And when his Metamorphoses in 15 books was published, it was a cause célèbre. The Roman epic of its founding was by Virgil, the Iliad turned into the Aeneid. But the Metamorphoses is Homer's Odyssey turned into the metamorphosis not of the founding of Rome, but of the transformation of the Roman Empire. Because Homer's Iliad is about the war that men make among themselves to the death, not only to the death, but to the desecration of the other men. We will not only kill you, which is how Achilles vowed after his best friend Patroclus was killed by the great Trojan hero warrior Hector. Hector thought that he had killed Achilles because Achilles held himself out from the war, from that battle. His favorite squeeze, as they say, his girl of the day was Briseis, and the head warrior Agamemnon took Briseis for himself, and pouting, Achilles gave his armor to his friend Patroclus, and when he was killed by Hector, Hector thought he had killed Achilles and gloated. And so the next day, Achilles went in his armor and not only killed Hector, but he tied the body, the corpse, to the back of his chariot and rode 3 times around the enormous spread of Troy, shredding and dusting and completely obliterating the body of Hector so that there was only shards left that Hector's father came to claim. The subtitle of the Iliad, forever, since it was written 3,000 years ago, is The Wrath of Achilles. The wrath of the strong, talented man who can always win in terms of the world, in terms of power. There always is an Achilles, head of the pack. But coming back from that 10 years of immersion into that war, none of the Greeks was able to make it home without scathing. And the only one who was able to come back and regain his kingdom, in a way, was Odysseus. And the Odyssey by Homer is about Odysseus not going through terrible masculine things, but encountering the wave after wave after a wave, the resonances of the feminine. So that the harmonic of the last resonance of waves in the Odyssey is he must come face to face with Penelope. But before he does, there is a penultimate, one step before the ultimate, of having to face his wife Penelope. Perfect balance. Penelope. He has to come face to face with Athena, who has been the mythic reality behind his ability to survive the Odyssey, to have his homecoming after the Iliad, after the Trojan War. And he tries his spiel on her when he wakes up from having been put ashore while he was asleep, exhausted by the Phaeacians with all of his treasures and so forth. And he sees this feminine, and he immediately starts to spiel her. Oh, I'm a merchant traveler from Crete. And she looks at him with her horizon, infinite, balanced gray eyes, like the sea at its vanishing into the horizon. And she says, do not lie to me. I know who you are deeper than you do. It is Athena. And because he can awaken to her, he has opened the gate so that he could be real with his wife Penelope. And she, after her testing of him, in terms of his ability to still love, yes, he can have life. He is really the great warrior, not Achilles. Odysseus is able to slay with just his young son, 21 years old, Telemachus, and an old servant whom he tells, in this hall are 101 suitors for my wife. They're eating me out of house and home, and one of them, Antinous, wants to be the top wolf. I am the top wolf. Just lock the doors so they can't get out. And Telemachus says, but there are too many. And Odysseus says, we have allies. The spirits of the real penetrate through the existential phenomenality as if it wasn't there. He slays all of the suitors. His bow is so difficult to make taunt that none of the suitors can make it taunt. He's arranged 12 axe heads in a row in the hall, and one needs to win Penelope by shooting an arrow through all 12 axe heads. The axle of the axe heads has a shape like that, almost like a bone spinal marrow. And on that were the double axes. The double axe origin goes back to Minoan times. The Minoan Greek word for that double axe is labis. And the palace of he who controls the labis was called the labyrinth. Rinth is ancient Greek, linear B Greek, for palace. And so the labyrinth was the place of the palace of the authority of power. And one had to shoot through 12 gates, 12 phases of this center of the gates of power of civilization. No one could string the bow. They couldn't even, not just pull the bow, they couldn't string it. And so Odysseus strings it in one movement. And when he does, he brings his hand back, twanging the bow, and it sounds so taut that it's like a temple bell of doom that brings silence to the entire hall of carousers. And quickly sends an arrow through the 12 and sends the next arrow through the throat of Antinous, who is silenced before he can shout. It is this quality of Homer that Virgil sought to build the Roman Empire on, mythically. It is Ovid who in the Metamorphoses showed the transformation of the Roman Empire into the field of the real, if one can go through the Metamorphoses. He begins in the beginning with the 4 ages of man. That was the standard Roman Empire culmination, the gold seal of power. There are 4 ages to man. There's a gold age, there's a silver age, there's a bronze age, then there's an iron age of decay, and it takes a really strong man to then bring the golden age back again. That's how he begins the Metamorphoses. But the end, the 15th book of the Metamorphoses, is all about the founding of Rome in a wisdom way, not by Romulus and Remus, but by the first wise king of Rome, Numa, and his relationship through the centuries to Pythagoras. And so the 15th book goes from the 4 ages of man to the eternity cosmos of Pythagoras. Very soon after that, Ovid was banished to where he would no longer be able to speak with anyone the beautiful classic Latin that he had. Augustus Caesar personally exiled him to the city on the Black Sea coast of what is today Romania, and he was left there for the rest of his life. Even when Augustus was replaced by Tiberius Caesar, the banishment held. It was not just a banishment from Rome or from the Roman Empire. It was a banishment from the language where anybody read or wrote Latin. And so he was put incommunicado, as it were, symbolically. In Moby Dick, Ahab is speaking with Starbuck. And Starbuck says to him, "Careful, Captain Ahab, thou gettest very close to blasphemy here." And Ahab stares at him with a severity, with his top hat black and long coat black, and he says, "Starbuck, I would smite the sun if it insulted me." More next week.